think it's broken. You know what? I'm gonna just take it. Is it? Let me see.
The whole thing.
Whole thing. Yeah, this tab is broken.
Of course, it had to happen right after Steve went down.
Of course.
There's a way for it to be flush. There we go.
That's the problem with plastics. They break. We're going. Okay, we're there. We can begin, Melissa. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom to you who are watching with us online today. We're so glad to have you here in our annual, I don't know how many we've done, but we've done a bunch. Our Question the Clergy services here for our 6th grade. Today's service is really for you 6th graders and for you all who are watching to look at our service, to participate in our service, but also to ask questions, especially our 6th graders. That's where we've made the ability possible for you to ask questions from the sanctuary. Our 6th graders at home also have a way of contacting us to ask questions. We will be pausing at different points in this service to ask for you to ask questions. We can have questions from 6th graders. We can have questions from their parents. And we really want to hear your questions about what's going on here during our worship service, about why we do the things we do. Cantor Jacob and I are going to be alternating, answering the questions back and forth. And so just enjoy the day, enjoy the morning, and we'll be pausing again at certain points in order to have you ask questions. And now is one of those points. So let me ask, just off the top, if anybody has any questions that they would like to raise about what it is that we're doing. There is, by the way, for those of you in the sanctuary, and they should know that the people watching online have a 10 to 20 second delay. So if we ask a question here or say something here, they hear it 10 to 20 seconds later. So hopefully we'll be able to deal with that little delay, and we might have a delay. If a question comes in after we've started, we'll certainly get back to that question later on.
But anything initial before we even get started, if anything comes to mind, could be about the room, the book that you're holding, what we're about to do together, anything before we get started.
I've had people ask about the stained glass behind us, but I'm not asking that question. I'm just wondering if anybody's wondering about anything. That's not my question, so if somebody's wondering about that. Okay, so we have a question here.
I would love to hear about the meaning of the stained glass behind you.
So the stained glass behind us was installed in this sanctuary in 1964 or 1965. I believe it's dedicated in 1965. You can find many different kinds of biblical themes. Watching it from afar, you can see a dove, which we, of course, always is a sign of peace for us. The figure that surrounds the ark, if you look at it carefully, it might resemble a pomegranate, because we believe that a pomegranate, for example, has 613 seeds in it. I personally have not counted them, but I can tell you that The wonderful part of our midrash is that the contents of a pomegranate represent knowledge, the 613 mitzvot, and they're represented. That's why the pomegranate symbol is used. We also have a tree here that is cut and representing the Holocaust right here. One can see that there. And there is a citation from the book of Hosea, I think, "Seek ye me and live, dirshuni v'chayu," and that is something that, above many holy arcs, there are different kinds of sayings. So those who created this design gave us those words to think about in their era, seeking God and living from the commandments. There is a general notion in Judaism that we should live by the commandments and not die by them. Now, the implication there could be that we don't have to be obsessive about our observance of the commandments to the point that it hurts. That we have to live and we have to find joy and we have to get sustenance from the commandments. Andrew?
Also, there is teaching around a worship space, that all worship spaces should somehow be connected to the outside, to the outdoors, to outside of that space. The idea being that our prayers should not end here. Like our work and our service should not end in this room, but it should translate to carrying those thoughts, ideas, and actions out into the world. And so prior to the renovation of another renovation of this building, this actually was the outside wall. And so that the stained glass would have actually led directly to you would have been able to see through the colors, of course, but to the outdoors.
Great question. And then a little bit of a tech tip is that in order for online to hear our in-person friends here, I need you to speak in the microphone. So thank you so much. I have no other questions coming in, but do you have any other questions here?
I was just wondering, I hadn't noticed this last night, but we used to have benches that we sat on here, and now we have chairs, I think, for social distancing. Is it a temporary thing, or are we going to have like different formations? Is this a
Thankfully, this is now the way we worship here, which means that we have a very flexible worship space. Already we've come off the bima a number of times. We've actually had services where our backs as clergy are to that wall, and we have people focused in that direction.
We have a couple of friends who were here last evening where we had a completely different room set up with the chairs here with empty space in the middle for our younger friends to be able to sit on the floor. There could be an opportunity for us to put all of the chairs in the round and lead in kind of that kind of orientation. The primary impetus was at least initially thinking about social distancing, but the fact is that more and more worship communities are gravitating toward flexible seating just because of what opportunities it provides for creativity in ritual and worship.
And to be accurate, actually, the dream of flexible seating predated the pandemic by about 3 years. I began speaking to leadership about it 3 years before the pandemic to consider one day when we could do this. It happened that it was a wonderful nexus of opportunities that we were able to create a worship space that would lend itself to many different kinds of expressions of spiritual connection and communal need. So.
And we only have a comment right now online that said, I like the different camera angles, which is also part of the renovations.
Great. The worship that we engage in, wherever and whenever we engage in our worship, really expresses gratitude to God for all the things we have in the world. The rabbis could do nothing more except think about how thankful they were. That they had their lives, they had their professions, they had their community connection. Whenever we rise in the morning, we thank God that we are alive. We thank God that we were able to wake up to come back to the world for yet another day. The prayer of Modeh Ani Lefanecha, which you find on page 186, where we'll start, is indeed the first thing that a person might say when she or he wakes up in the morning because it allows them to rise with a feeling of, yes, I'm alive, even though I may be a little tired when I get up in the morning, but I am here and I'm able to be with this day. We begin on page 186.
Ode ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shehechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla, rabba emunatecha, rabba emunatecha, ode ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shehechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla, b'chemla, rabba emunatecha, rabba emunatecha, rabba emunatecha.
On page 190 is the moment in time when those who are leading this service, and typically it might be someone who is observing a bar mitzvah in our context today, when they are presented a talit by their family. But I think we're all going to put on our talitot together. Yeah.
And if anybody's here who wants to wear a talit, we have some right outside the sanctuary. You're welcome to go grab one if you like, if you're over 13.
Baruch atah
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahitatef b'tzitzit.
I now invite you to turn to page 195. 184. 184. Each of us enters this sanctuary with a different need. Some hearts are full of peace and gratitude, overflowing with love and joy. They are eager to confront the day to make the world a better place. They are recovering from illness or have escaped misfortune. We rejoice with them. Some hearts ache with sorrow. Disappointments weigh heavily on them. Families have been broken. Loved ones lie on a bed of pain. Death has taken a cherished loved one. May our presence and caring bring them comfort. Some hearts are embittered. Ideals are betrayed and mocked. Answers sought in vain. Life has lost its meaning and value. May the knowledge that we, too, are searching restore our hope and renew our faith. Page 192.
Atovu. 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 Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Atovu. Atovu. Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Vani berov chasecha, avo veitecha, eshachav el heichal kodshecha, ve'iratecha. Atovu, atovu, ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Atovu, soul. Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Mishkenotecha Yisrael.
I invite you to read with me on the top of page 195. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe. With divine wisdom you have made our bodies, combining veins, arteries, and vital organs into a finely balanced network. Wondrous maker and sustainer of life, were one of them to fail, how well we are aware. We would lack the strength to stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, source of our health and strength. Baruch atah Adonai, rofei chol basar, umafli la'asot. Page 196. My God, the soul you have given me is pure. You created it, you shaped it, you breathed it into me, and you protect it within me. For as long as my soul is within me, I offer thanks to you, Adonai, my God, and God of my ancestors, source of all creation, sovereign of all souls. Praised are you, Adonai, whose hand is in every living soul and breath of humankind. Baruch atah Adonai, asher be'ado nefesh kol chai, baruch kol basar ish.
Amen.
Page 198. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me in the image of God.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Israel with strength.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage in words of Torah.
Amen.
Page 205. From the cowardice that shrinks from new truth, from the laziness that is content with half-truths, from the arrogance that thinks it knows all truth, O God of truth, deliver us. Blessed is Adonai, teacher of Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamlamed Torah le'amo Yisrael.
Amen.
Please read with me on page 206. These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study, morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all.
We pause here for a few questions. We've just completed parts of the service, which technically are sort of preparatory in nature. The Birkot HaShachar, the blessings of the dawn, and the Pezukei de Zimra, the songs of praise, are there to sort of help us enter a time when it feels right for us to pray. Sometimes we don't feel like it's always the best time to pray, although these psalms and these songs are supposed to get us there. And we're about to begin the official Shacharit service, the service of the morning hours, but we would want to pause here and see if there are questions.
We have a couple of questions online, so thank you, and then we'll get to us here. It has to do with the Talit. What is a Talit? Why do we wear it? And why do we wear it, and what is it?
Let's start.
Sure. So the Talit is this garment that we have a few of us in this space wearing. They can be made of all kinds of different fabric. There are certain rules about what kinds can or can't be used, but the identifying feature of all of them, no matter what kind of talit they might be, what fabric it might be made of, are these fringes at the corner. When we were reciting the blessing earlier, you may have heard those two words that ended that blessing, lehit atef batzitzit, to wrap oneself in the tzitzit, which literally means fringes. And so these fringes, which are tied in a very special way, there's a whole process one uses to tie the tzitzit on a talit with all kinds of blessings, and they're meant to signify, to remind us of the mitzvot, of the commandments. Actually, we're going to be offering a prayer in just a little while that refers to the tzitzit in it.
Following the Shema, or as part of the Shema prayer, at the very end, we read this selection from the book of Numbers, which says, it gives the command that on the corners of your garments, one is supposed to wear the tzitzit. And in fact, you probably are familiar with the people in other Jewish communities who wear the tzitzit all the time. You see them coming from their belts, from their waistlines. They wear something called a talit katan, which is like an undergarment, an undershirt. But at the corner of each of the four corners, there are the tzitzit, and they wear that under their clothing. And so, but they expose them so they can see them. The issue is, as Cantor Jacob said, is to be able to see the tzitzit so that one is reminded of the commandments. In our traditions, we wear them when we worship. We wear them in the sanctuary. Distinctive clothing became not part of Reform's observance of Judaism back in the 19th century.
And exactly as Rabbi mentioned, very specifically in that Numbers passage, which we'll get to, it's going to be on like page 236, we'll get there in just a little while, but it specifically says, look at them and recall the commandments.
So actually, my question's about sort of variation across Jewish communities. So it's always struck me, even within the Reformed tradition, for instance, that you go to different services and there's a very different service structure. The melodies are often different. And I think, there's clearly positives and negatives. Like, it's nice for a community to create its own, but it's harder to go into any service and know it. And so I'm sort of wondering, like, where that tradition came from, why it is. Is it true of the Orthodox too? And then sort of relatedly, I've always wondered, some Jewish places of worship are referred to as temples and some as synagogues. And is that a choice, or is that sort of, there's a firm definition?
Well, that's a wonderful set of questions, really. And the answers could be very involved. Let's take our favorite one of those questions, and we'll answer one, and we'll answer maybe more later.
I probably should speak to the music component of the question that you just asked. I will say that there has always been a wide variety of melodies for prayers used across Jewish communities in the world ever since the diaspora, so like the destruction of the temple. But it would usually be regional. You'd have, there would be particular kinds of melodies that would be used by Jews in a particular place. As we become a more interconnected world, melodies are able to travel further and become more widespread. And gain a broader popularity, but it has really always been the case that a particular synagogue or a particular community would have melodies that are their own custom for their community. That's been the norm. Actually, the idea of there being wider spread melodies across communities, across a greater geographic area, that is the new component of our modern Jewish world that has to do with how interconnected we all are. Though it is a challenge, going into a new place and not knowing the melodies, but part of becoming integrated into a community is attending regularly, letting the way that community does things kind of sink into your bones and become yours.
And when it comes to the matter of whether this institution that we're sitting in is a temple or a synagogue, the word synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, is a Greek word that pretty much means the same thing as Beit Knesset, a house of assembly. And in fact, the word synagogue for hundreds of years was the word to describe, or Beit Knesset better in Hebrew, was the word used to describe the place where you worship. Now, when the Reform movement came and was created in the early parts of the 19th century, there was an attitude that since the temple in Jerusalem, with a capital T, since the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed and we had no desire to return there, and certainly no desire to reinstitute the sacrificial system, the fact is reformers thought, that we in each, therefore, community had our own little temple where we direct our attention. Our attention's not directed to the temple in Jerusalem, but we have a temple locally. And so it is more the case, although today it shifts all over the place. Today, many Reform synagogues are called temples, either in their name, as we are, or people refer to them as the temple. This rabbi refers to I use that term interchangeably, because I think the terms really are interchangeable. In terms of the Reform philosophy, I don't believe we are returning to worship in Jerusalem, but I think that that's the temple, and we are all synagogues. That's just personally my approach.
And that's also in English too. In Hebrew, we do refer to this as a Beit Knesset. I don't know that in Hebrew anyone would refer to a synagogue as a Beit Mikdash, which is the literal translation of a temple in Hebrew. But we could maybe perhaps find someone who would. The one little thing I wanted to add about music is that in every generation you have new music being written all the time. And it really becomes a form of midrash, of interpretation of the liturgy. What we're trying to do is to create a personal connection with the divine and with one another. And as sensibilities with music change from generation to generation, new midrash, new interpretation becomes necessary so that we can still have a meaningful connection to what we're doing. Certainly some melodies will remain across generations, but in order for worship to remain vibrant and new to the people who are engaging in it, you need to have the ability for creativity. And we are very fortunate that we do in our world have, in every generation, phenomenal new Jewish music for worship and for non-worship purposes being written all the time.
I have one question that changes our questions to maybe more for B'nai Mitzvah prep. And the question is, when Cantor sings prayers, do we ever know ahead of time how many verses he will sing?
You could always ask me. Maybe not in the service itself, but if you want to know, sure. There are times where I'm going to be singing more than one verse for a particular melody, and other times where I'm going to be wanting to keep things a little bit shorter. But yeah, you're always welcome to ask me before the service starts.
We now turn to page 224. For the Reader's Kaddish, I invite you to rise.
Yitkadal veyitkadash shemei Rabba.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach irutech v'yamlich malchutech. B'chayeichon uv'yomeichon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala, ba'agala, uvizman kariv, veimeru, amen. Yehi shemech rabba mevarach, le'alam ulamei almaya, yitbarach, yitbarach ve'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar ve'yitromam ve'yitnaseh, ve'yithadar ve'yit'aleh ve'yithalal shemech tekudsha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma ve'yimeru amen.
Page 226. 226.
Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Baruchu et Adonai Hamevorach. Baruch Adonai Hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai Hamevorach le'olam va'ed.
Page 228.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol, hameir la'aretz veladarim aleha berachamim, uvtuvo mechadesh bechol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chokhma asita, mal'ah ha'aretz kinyanecha. Titbarach Adonai Eloheinu al shevach ma'aseh yadecha, ve'al me'ore or she'asita yefa'arucha sela. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir, v'nizkechu lanu mehera le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'me'orot.
Please read with me on the bottom of page 228. Praised are you, Adonai,
Our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai! In wisdom you formed them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands, and for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights. Baruch atah Adonai, yotzer ha'me'orot.
Page 231. Love your neighbor as yourself, you said, and light blinded we saw that inner and outer worlds are one, as you are one. You spoke and we wrote, we reached for you down the centuries, your light moving before us. As we climbed, fell back and climbed again, your Sinai of life. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher be'amo Yisrael ba'ahava.
Amen.
Page 232.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch She'eloheinu Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
You may be seated and turn to page 234 for Ve'ahavta. ואהבת
את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
Page 237. If people fall, can they not also rise? If they break away, can they not return? The stork in the sky knows when to migrate. The dove and the swallow know the season of return. What human instinct knows the time to turn back? What cue sparks the conscience of the soul? We pray to sense this day anew, attuned to the call of sacred living.
למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Page 239, I invite you to read responsively with me. The eternal truth is that you alone are God, and there is none else.
May the righteous of all nations rejoice in your love and exult in your justice.
Let them beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks.
Let nation not lift up sword against nation, nor learn war anymore.
You shall not hate your brother or your sister in your heart.
The stranger that sojourns with you shall be accepted as your equal, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Why do you crush my people and oppress the poor? Asks God.
We know that the Eternal One defends the poor and upholds the rights of the needy.
Praise to God Most High.
Blessed is God and deserving of blessing.
Page 240.
כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. שיר החדשה שיבחו גאונים, ושמך על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. לי 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 לה 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 לי 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 לה 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 לי 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 לה 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 לי 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 לה 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 לי. צור ישראל ומה בעזרת ישראל ובתי חינומך יהודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
So that part of Shacharit that we just offered, between the last set of questions and this one, contains three important rubrics or categories of prayers. Again, understanding that the rabbis spoke about the gratitude that we should have for all that God has given us on this planet, the three things generally, or I should say in broad terms, that we offered gratitude over. First was the gratitude that the sun comes up and the sun rotates regularly around us, or we actually rotate around the sun, and that all of the functions of the universe and all the functions of the planet happen in fairly regular ways. The second kind of rubric, the second kind of general and broad category of our gratitude is thanks for Torah. Thanks for the lessons, gratitude for the lessons of Torah and all the ways that the Torah guides our life. Then we pause for the declaration of the Shema, because the rabbis felt it's very important for us to acknowledge God's sovereignty at that moment. And then the third general broad issue, or the broad way that we offer gratitude, is for freedom and is for liberation. We talk in the prayer book about the liberation from Egypt, but there is a hint that we are to thank God also for our ability to think about future liberations, not only for us, but also for others who are engaged similarly in the world. So that's what we've just done, and now we're going to go to something different. But before that, time for questions.
Yeah.
I have a question that was sparked by the questions about the Talit. And the question is, why do we wear a kippah?
Ooh.
That's a very difficult question.
So I once had I was in college and I asked my Hillel director this exact same question. This is the person who ran a Jewish organization when I was at university. And I said, could you, in one sentence, or there's a Jewish expression, on one foot, meaning in a very quick and kind of concise way, tell me, why is it that we wear a kippah? And her very simple answer, which I think you could unpack in lots of different ways, was to remind us that there's something over our heads. And I took that to mean not just this idea that, that there's something like heaven above us, but rather that there's some way in which we're all connected to each other, that there's something beyond all of us. You could call it God or some other kind of unifying force that connects all human beings to one another. And so for me, wearing the yarmulke is kind of a way of reminding myself that there is some divine presence, something beyond myself that connects me to other people.
It is interesting to note that there is not a mitzvah. Wearing a kippah is not one of the 613 commandments. And in fact, you will find Jewish communities in different parts of the world who specifically do not wear a kippah. Some Arab Jewish communities and other Jewish communities in the Near East and in the Middle East don't wear kippot specifically. Many do, obviously.
Why did you sing the second part of Shema quieter?
Ooh,
Great question. So there is a tradition. The words of the Shema and the words that follow that quiet passage that you remark upon are one particular section of Torah. It's from the book of Deuteronomy. It's chapter 6, verses 4 to 9. And some of the rabbis felt that as much as we want to express God's sovereignty, and we praise God for being a sovereign of our people, of our world, of our universe, they felt that when you impose other words that aren't in the Torah, and those words that are quiet aren't found in the Torah, that you say them quietly in order to sort of say, I'm not really imposing or suggesting that these words come from Torah, but I think we should say them anyway. Those words that we say quietly are from the book of Psalms, Proverbs?
We could double check.
Let's double check where they are from.
It should say, actually, we should actually have a nice little, our prayer book's very good about this typically. It usually gives us a little bit of a footnote. Yes, so it is rabbinic. It's inspired by Nehemiah, but it's from the Mishnah.
Yeah. So they are biblical, inspired by a biblical phrase, and they aren't part of Torah. So to make sure we know those aren't Torah verses. That there is a custom to say them quietly.
And
Quiet
some
time.
people actually don't even say it out loud at all. They'll only say the first line of Shema, and then they'll say it completely inside that line, and then continue on. And there are other communities where they only say the first line out loud, and then they say everything else, that little rabbinic line, but also the whole rest of Ve'ahavta and on, quietly. So there's a whole range of customs, but as Rabbi mentioned, it's just really acknowledging that there's a difference of where that sentence comes from.
I have a follow-up question on the Talit. I vaguely remember there are some services where it's worn and some where it isn't. Can you remind me like when it is and isn't and why?
Sure. Generally speaking, a talit, now I come from a conservative background, and generally speaking, a talit would be worn, in my background, when a Torah service is held. Traditionally, a talit is not worn at night. A talit is worn on Kol Nidre. A talit is worn on specifically Erev Yom Kippur, because it resembles the kittel, it resembles the white garment that we wear on holidays or that we wear when we are buried and after we've died, but it really keeps us all equal, and especially on Erev Yom Kippur when we offer confessions, everyone is supposed to wear it because everyone is sort of equal in the eyes of God and the eyes of one another. We may have very nice fancy clothes on underneath, but once we put on the talit, we really are all one in that judgment.
And to the rabbi's point about how there would be custom of wearing a talit in a Torah service, the one other exception possibly in the evening is Simchat Torah. If we have a Torah service, particularly there are customs that people might have when one is approaching Torah or handling a Torah scroll of wearing a talit. So you'll see in some synagogues where there might be somebody who typically doesn't have a custom of wearing a talit, but if they're invited up for an aliyah, and this is again in certain synagogues, that they would actually be offered if they wanted to wear a talit specifically because they're approaching Torah. And then I'll say for my own part that I like to wear a talit whenever I'm leading prayer, or even if I'm not leading prayer at all the other times that we've talked about. But if I was a Jew in the pew in an evening service, I probably wouldn't wear one.
I have one question here about the Bahu and the bowing. Why do we bow during the Bahu?
So bowing during the Bahu, when we praise God, to whom blessing is due, it's a custom to, as I think that as Rambam would say, that we bow in the presence of sovereign presence. We bow in the presence of royalty. If we were going to visit a queen or a king or any other similar kind of ruler, we would actually bow a little. There's a custom that their subjects would bow to them. And similarly, the rabbis instituted this notion of bowing as a way of acknowledging God's sovereignty, specifically at that moment and at other times too during this service. They outlined 4 specific moments, say, for example, in the tefillah that we're about to start. They said there are 4 specific moments when we do bow also. It's not simply during the Bahu, but it actually is at various times in the worship when we offer an acknowledgement of God's sovereignty.
Yeah. There's 2 things that really happen when you bow too. One, as Rabbi mentioned, it's a sign of respect, for somebody who you feel has some kind of authority over you, whoever that might be. And then also vulnerability. When you bow physically, you're making it so that you're looking down. You can't see the person in front of you. You make it so that if they wanted to, they could hurt you. So you're also trusting the person that you're coming before not to. So when you bow, you're actually making yourself a little bit more vulnerable too. So that vulnerability and that respect both happen.
I just wanted to go back to the talis. Do most of the bar and bat mitzvah wear their talis for their bar and bat mitzvah?
So this is a custom here at Temple Beth El that probably 95% of our families follow. Some families come from classic Reform backgrounds, and they don't offer their child a talit, and it's perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable. There is no community expectation of that. Other expectations may come from within the family or be imposed from the families for more distant relatives. Mm-hmm. The prayer service that we're about to start is the tefillah. It's called the Amidah sometimes because that word means standing, because a lot of it is said standing up. We'll talk more about that as we're done.
So we invite you to rise for the tefillah on page 242.
Adonai sifatai tika ufi agitehi atecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
Page 244. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei HaKol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'nehem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer Umoshia Umagein, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magein Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah.
Page 246. Ata gibor leolam Adonai, mechaye hakol ata rav leoshia, mashiv haruach umorid hagashem.
Mechalkel chaim bechesed, mechaye hakol berachamim rabim, somech noflim verofei cholim, umatir asurim, umekayem emunato lishenei afar, micha mocha bal gevurot, umido melach, melech memit umechaye, umatzmiach Yeshua.
Ve'eman atalacha. V'na'aman atalacha o takol, Baruch atah Adonai mechaye hakol.
Amen.
Page 248.
Nikadesh et shimcha ba'olam, Yeshem shemakdishim oto b'shmei maron, kakatuv al yad neviecha, V'kara ze el ze ve'amar, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Melol kol haaretz, Kevodo, Adir Adirenu Adonai, Adonenu Ma'adir Shimcha, B'chol haaretz, Baruch Kevod Adonai, Mikomo, Echad hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu Malkeinu, Hu Moshi'enu ve'hu Yashmi'enu, Berachamav le'nei kol chai, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai le'olam, Elohai Zion, Edor v'ador, Alleluia, Ledor ברכתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
To all generations we will declare your greatness, and for all eternity proclaim your holiness. Your praise, O God, shall never depart from our lips. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Page 250.
ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. You may be seated. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. מקדשי שבי שבת, כולם יספרו ויתעמרו מטובך שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. והשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו שבת. חמדת ימים אותו קראת שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת.
Page 253. I invite you to read with me. We offer thanks, O God, for this Shabbat, which unites us in faith and hope, for Shabbat holiness, which inspires sacred living, for Shabbat memories glowing even in darkness, for Shabbat peace, born of friendship and love, we offer thanks and blessing, O God. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Page 255. On this holy Shabbat, may we draw nearer to life, to peace, and to joy. May we find true rest, holiness in our deeds, worth in our study of Torah. Let us feed on the love of goodness. Let us drink from the love of goodness, restrain our thirst for excess, and cleanse our hearts to serve life well. On this holy Shabbat, may we draw nearer in life, in peace, and in joy. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otcha levadcha beyira na'avod.
Amen.
Page 258.
Sim shalom, tova ubracha, ein v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, archeinu yotzreinu kulanu ke'echad, ve'or panecha כי באור פניך נתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו. שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים ורחמים עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל ישראל עמך, תורת חיים ואהבת חסד, ואהבת חסד, וצדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים ושלום. שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים ורחמים עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל ישראל עמך, טוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל, בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים ורחמים עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל ישראל עמך.
Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of our world. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Praised are you, Adonai, who blesses your people with peace. Baruch atah Adonai, hamvarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. We now take a few moments of your own personal prayers.
As we conclude our personal prayers, I also would now like to offer a communal prayer. And it's a communal prayer that is said in first person singular. Normally we don't do that. Normally the prayers that we offer are said on behalf of the whole community, and rare are the instances when we offer a bit of worship for ourselves. But we each need things, too, that we're allowed to ask for, we're allowed to seek for inside or from a higher authority, perhaps, or from a different place. And so on page 261, at the middle of the page, is this prayer seeking the kinds of qualities that make us better people, I think, in the world. I invite you to join me. We need strength, humility, courage, patience. Strength to control my passions, humility to assess my own worth, courage to rise above defeats, patience to cleanse myself of imperfections, and wisdom to learn and live by our sacred teachings. Let me not be discouraged by my failings. Let me take heart from all that is good and noble in my character. Keep me from falling victim to cynicism. Teach me sincerity and enthusiasm. Endow me with perception and courage that I may observe others with compassion and love. On page 260, the second Hebrew paragraph from the bottom. ratzon.
Ratzon refi v'hegion libi lefanecha yiyu leratzon refi v'hegion libi lefanecha Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri v'goali Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri v'goali Yiyu leratzon refi v'hegion libi lefanecha Yiyu leratzon refi v'hegion libi lefanecha Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri v'goali Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri, Adonai tzuri v'goali.
So the tefillah that we just concluded involves on Shabbat 7 different categories or 7 different topics of prayer that we offer. A prayer of praise of God, a recognition of God's heroic acts, a recognition of God's sanctity, a recognition of the sanctity of this day, a prayer for acceptance. May our prayers be accepted on high. A prayer for thanksgiving for all that we have, and a prayer for peace. In the middle of the week, when we don't have Shabbat, we actually add a lot of different material to this prayer, mainly a section of 13 petitionary prayers, which on Shabbat, the philosophy is we don't want to bother God with our problems on Shabbat. So the rabbis removed the petitionary prayers for this day. Although I'm always curious to note that we do ask God, we do talk about the search for peace, which in a way is petitionary also, but that's just me.
Perhaps it's just that on Shabbat, we should be offering more gratitude than we are asking for things. Maybe just to shift the balance.
Perhaps. But now is the time to pause for your questions.
I have a couple of questions that have come in. There are several questions about the same thing. How heavy is the Torah? Maybe they mean physically.
I was going to say, it's very serious. Yeah. Very serious.
I think these are like weight related, like how heavy? Again, maybe a question is people are thinking about becoming, when they lead a service for their B'nai Mitzvah.
So we have basically two, why don't you go?
Well, we have, multiple Torah scrolls in our congregation. So the shortest answer is it depends. If you're curious about how heavy is a Torah scroll that I myself might be holding, we are very mindful of the fact that there are some who, when they are approaching holding a Torah scroll for the first time, that there might be some nervousness there because it's a very weighty document in our tradition, and nobody wants to be the one who drops it, though that has not, I think, happened here, at least not in my recollection.
Not in my recollection here.
Mostly because you always make sure that whoever is carrying the Torah scroll has lots of support all around them, so there's always somebody who's both keeping their eyes and their hands ready if needed, though it hasn't been needed. That being said, we have a smaller Torah scroll that is very, very light, very easy to carry, especially for somebody who's holding it for the first time and a little bit nervous. But it's a little bit harder to read from, and so for first-time Torah readers, we have the larger scroll that we use for people to actually read from.
And at the final rehearsal that all of our B'nai Mitzvah go through, they hold the small Torah to feel the weight, and they get to practice that before the service. Any other questions?
Before we go into the Torah service itself, I actually need to grab I have my own. I'm going to be chanting Torah for us all today, and I actually happen to have a yad that I like to use when I read Torah that my father carved. It's in my office. I'm going to go grab it
So
really
I'll
quickly.
tell them about some of the things.
Sure.
There are some logistic matters here in the sanctuary that we all should be aware of, especially in these times when we still are remaining a little distanced from one another, just as the chairs, as you see, obviously are distanced from one another. And for those of you who are watching online, you might be able to see this too. I want to have everybody take their dominant arm, whichever their dominant arm or hand is, and put it in the sky and just try and extend your pinky up a little bit. There is a custom that when the Torah proceeds around the temple, some people would run up and touch it with their Talit or a prayer book, and they would kiss that. But since we don't want to encourage people to run around and to intersect too many people, we're trying to stay healthy, right? So if you take your pinky and direct it in the direction of the Torah scroll, you are making a psychic connection. You are making an intentional sort of movement toward the Torah as it passes around you. And you'll see how it passes around the whole sanctuary in just a few moments.
Sorry, hold on, my microphone might not be on. I've also seen one other gesture that in other communities too, where this is particularly done by people who want to offer respect to someone or something but can't touch it, for people who are Shomrei Nagia or for any other faith where they might not want to touch something for any variety of reasons, where putting a hand on the heart and kind of inclining oneself toward the thing is another possibility.
Some people raise the tzitzit and raise it toward the talit as well.
Anything that shows a sign of
recognition.
Love and respect.
Right. Okay. Can I ask if there are some volunteers who may want to help us? Right? So we will take the Torah out. As the cantor said, we will be reading from Torah this morning. And we might need some willing volunteers who might be willing to help us have non-speaking roles, but to help us undress and then dress the Torah scroll. If anybody would like that, no, you don't. If you raise your hand now, that's great. Or if later on you say, gee, I'd like to try that, just come on up. We're going to be dressing and undressing the Torah scroll from down on the floor just in front of the bima in that direction over there. So we hope to see especially our students, but anybody may come up and give us a hand as well. We'd like to invite you, therefore, to turn to page 362 and 363 in the prayer book. Again, page 362, and it's opposite page 363. As a community, we together inaugurate the service for the reading of Torah. So I would like to invite you to look at the middle of 363 and to, together with one another, offer this section from the book of Deuteronomy to help us inaugurate our Torah service today. Please join me. Assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the strangers in your cities, to hear, to learn, to revere Adonai your God, to observe faithfully the words of this Torah, and let their children who do not yet know it hear, that they too may learn to revere Adonai your God. We invite the congregation to rise.
Ein kamocha Elohim Adonai ve'ein kemasecha Malchutcha malchut kol olamim Umemshaltecha bechol dor vador Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai imloch leolam va'ed Adonai oz le'amo itein Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom.
We continue on page 366.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Adon Shemot Adul Adonai iti unerom mima shemo yachdav Lecha Adonai hagedula ve'hagevura ve'hatiferet ve'hanetzach ve'hahod ככל בשמיים ובארץ, ככל בשמיים ובארץ. לך אדוני הממלכה, וימין נעשה לכל ראש. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. הללו, הללו, הללו. הללו, הללו, הללו. הללו, הללו, הללו. הללו, הללו, הללו.
The congregation may be seated. As a brief Devar Torah, just to let you know what this week's Torah portion is about, today's Torah portion is the continuing delivering of all of the commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai. The specific commandments that we now switch to are the commandments directly related to building that temple in Jerusalem, or really in the context of Torah, to build the desert sanctuary. And they mention all of the precious metals, and they mention all of the animal skins and all of the beautiful woods that are used. And they also very carefully mention or refer to or imply a blueprint, some kind of plan, some kind of design that God delivers to Moses, who now is going to use as a design, a plan for that temple. And what's fascinating is that many of the commentators, when they look to these words, they say, oh, what a beautiful building this is. And indeed, you'll see, with all of the metals and all of the jewels and everything else that follows, all of the yarns and all of the skins that follow, it must have been a really incredible place. But there's one letter that some of the commentators mention, they say is misplaced, or it's placed for a specific reason. And the one letter is the Hebrew letter Vav. Because the commentators say at the very ending of the section that Cantor is going to offer for us today is a very short phrase, which is V'chein ta'asu, and thus they will have made it. It's hard to translate the verb, but and thus they will have made it. Chen ta'asu, because it hasn't been made yet, right? Except that vav, where it says v'chein, the v there, to the commentators implied something quite different. They said there aren't only the plans for this desert tabernacle, but there really were plans for the tabernacle in Jerusalem. Because they said, do all these things, and then it says, and they will do it. Well, what is this additional thing that they will do? And the rabbis read that as an addition to what we see here. And I would take that even farther, because the instructions for building a tabernacle or building a temple or building a synagogue building as we have, that's our future. Here, from the standpoint of Torah, using the commentaries, they said, we're looking forward to not only the desert tabernacle, but really we're looking toward the Jerusalem temple. That's what we're at. And I would say, too, that when we think about building a building like the one we're sitting in, we, too, have to be sure that there are plans and there are beautiful materials and there are donors who make those things. And it's the combination of all of that. It's the plans, it is the materials, it's finding all of those resources, and it is the people who support that we need to find as well when we build, or in our case, when we remodeled this building last year, when we renovated this room. So we're always looking to the future, I think, is one of the implications of our text today. And we're going to be reading from Torah.
Yep. I have to say, this is one of my favorite passages, actually. I had a clergy partner who once said that about like most of the Torah. She would tell people every week why this was her favorite portion in the whole Torah. But this really is one of my favorite parts. It has this really incredible verse. It's right up there for me with like, love your neighbor as yourself. It says, Ve'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. And let them make me a sacred space so that I can dwell among them. But what's interesting is that they're not making a mikdash, they're making a mishkan. They're making literally a place where the Shekhinah, where God's presence can dwell. And this idea that in order for something special and sacred to be among us, it's dependent upon us. We have to create the space. We have to bring all of these various things to create sacred space so that something special can happen. And so I'm really grateful to be able to offer this reading and for the Aliyah.
So first of all, on page 604 of the Torah commentaries that you have is where we will be reading from today. You should go over here. Yeah. Page 604 at the top is the beginning of Terumah. And for the Aliyah to the Torah, we are privileged to call our colleague and friend, we call to the Torah Nicole Jar.
Ekra la'amod nechama bat Yaakov la'aliyah leTorah.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe le'mor. Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'yikchu li teruma. Me'ed kol ish asher yidvenu libo. Tikchu et terumati. V'zot hateruma asher tikchu me'itam. Zahav v'chesef u'nechoshet. ותכלת וארגמן, ותולעת שני ושש ועזים, ואורות אלים מאוד עמים, ואורות תחשים ועצי שיטים, שמן למאור, ושמים לשמן המשחה, ולקטורת הסמים, אבני שוהם ואבני מילואים, לאפוד ולחושן, ועשו לי מקדש ושכנתי בתוכם ככל אשר אני מראה אותך את תבנית המשכן ואת תבנית כל כליו וכן תעשו.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
Yasher koach.
Now we'd like to ask the congregation to turn to page 376 in the prayer book. Different customs exist in different communities where we offer special prayers and blessings. Sometimes if there are numerous aliyot, then we will have special prayers and blessings along with them. But here in our community, we actually offer some special blessings as a block together. And we begin on page 376, which is, the first prayer is a prayer for our country, beginning at the middle of the page. It begins with this selection in the middle of the page from the book of Isaiah. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and to untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, give clothing and do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, if you offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then your light shall shine in darkness. I invite you to join me. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace. May we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen.
Amen.
On page 377 is a prayer for the state of Israel. I invite you to join me as I offer this. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love. Spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. And amen. And finally, on page 371 is a familiar prayer to us, of course, is Misha Beirach. It is a prayer of healing and wholeness that we offer for people who are ill at this time. We have almost 100 people on our healing list this week, and we are thinking of all of them and all of the ways that they are healing, God willing, from their injuries and from their long-term and even some short-term illnesses, obviously. We're not going to read all their names here as we had in the past. The list is quite voluminous and we're online. We want to try and protect people's privacy a little bit. But if you have the name of someone that you would like to offer here today, it may or may not be heard online, just to be clear, but this person might be in your heart because you know that more prayer and more contact and their knowledge that communities like this are praying on their behalf is very important to their healing process. But if you have someone whom you're thinking about, we invite you to offer the name of someone now. Are there other people we should be thinking about? On page 371, then, we say these prayers for those we know about and those we don't know about, and in our hearts or aloud, we name those facing illness and pain. We offer Beirach at the middle of the page.
Beirach Avotenu Mikor habracha Lavotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Ishebeirach imotenu mikor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
now we ask the community to prepare for the dressing of the Torah. If there are students or parents who would like to come up and help us with that, we have room for some volunteers, so please join us.
Izot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. La 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 la
Excellent job, everybody. The Haftarah is the portion of the books of the prophets that accompany a particular Torah portion. Today's Haftarah, which I'll offer a brief selection from, comes from the book of 1 Kings. And whereas the Torah portion spoke about the building of the tabernacle in the desert, the book of Kings in this particular section talks about the building of the temple in Jerusalem specifically, and it describes King Solomon, whose responsibility it becomes now to build that temple there in Jerusalem. And so if you'd like to follow along in the Torah commentary, you can do so on page 718. On page 718, I'm starting at verse number 9. Just to give you a sense, there are blessings that come before and after, and those who are students, of course, will see that the trope system, the melody system of the Haftarah, is different from the trope system of the Torah portion. The blessings, by the way, for the Haftarah can be found on page 372 in the prayer book. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hane'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'Torah u'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo Uvinevi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek. Vayiven et habayit vayechalehu vayispon et habayit gevim usderot ba'arazim. Vayiven et hayatzia al kol habayit chamesh amot komato. Vayechoz et habayit ba'atzei arazim. Vayehi devar Adonai el Shlomo lemor. Habayit hazeh asher ata voneh. Im telech bechukotai ve'et mishpatai ta'aseh. Ve'shamarta et kol mitzvotai lalechet bahem. V'hakimoti et devari itach asher dibarti el David avicha. V'shochantihi בתוך בני ישראל, ולא אעזוב את עמי ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת. So, we're going to pause right here for another period of questions. The Torah service, of course, includes Torah, Haftarah, that selection that I just read from the book of 1 Kings, as well as appropriate communal prayers. The issue is, I think, for us at Bethel, too, is to make sure that everyone is thought about, everyone is considered, the needs of our immediate worship community here and online with us today, the needs of the greater community, and our own spiritual need for intellectual stimulation. That's why we have, one of the reasons why we offer Torah, so we can figure out what the Torah, how does that affect our lives today? Your question.
Any questions here? I have some general questions that aren't related to the service, which I offer. Is there anyone who has a question about where we're at in the service right now and what we've done?
About anything that we've done so far.
It could be in the liturgy. It could be things that we did physically, ritually.
Just a curiosity. In the Torah, it said that the ark, I think it was talking about the ark would be made of acacia wood. I was curious about our ark and if it was made of that traditional wood or if there's a variety nowadays.
I don't know the answer about whether this ark is made of acacia wood.
I would say that acacia is just would be a tree that was available to them in that region. It was a very widespread tree that. So I don't know that there's necessarily a specific reason why the ark was made of acacia, though I'm sure that it's ripe for interpretation of why that particular wood might have been chosen.
I have a question back here from our tech support, Melissa.
I'm curious if Cantor can tell us a little more about his yad, since it was made, he mentioned, by his dad. I didn't realize, like, what different types of materials or, like, what things can a yad be?
So a yad, so let's back up to why we even use a yad at all, which is a great, I think, kind of basis. The Torah is written with on parchment, which is not actually paper, but actually animal hide that is stretched and created into a parchment. And the ink, because it's not paper, the ink actually doesn't sink into the parchment, but is really just on the surface. And it could be scratched off, or the oils in our fingers can actually damage or blur or in some way cause harm to the text on the scroll itself. And so to kind of protect the ink that's on the scroll, the tradition is not to actually use one's finger when pointing at the words, but to use something else. So there are all kinds of, and the word yad in Hebrew just means hand. So it's an extension of your hand. The ones that we have in the ark attached to the Torah scroll are made of metal, and if you look very closely, you'll even see that at the end they have a little little hand with a little pointer finger, as if it really is an extension of your index finger pointing to the text. And my father is a amateur woodworker, wood carver, among many other things, and so he just carved a yad out of a tree branch, and it's one that I particularly like to use whenever I get the opportunity to chant Torah.
We have a program called the B'nai Mitzvah Club that 5th, 6th, and 7th graders attend. This is in May when religious school, Hebrew school's over. We have the B'nai Mitzvah Club. And this year we're all making our own yad that we can use for our services for whenever. But it's yours to keep and to make and create. So that's this year with the B'nai Mitzvah Club. So stay tuned for that.
I just have a question about the blessings before the Torah, reading the Torah. And is there a tradition here about who gets called up to be a part of those prayers?
So it depends upon what kind of worship context we're in. When we are at a time when B'nai Mitzvah happen in our sanctuary, the B'nai Mitzvah family usually choose who gets to come up for the aliyot. Each of those times that someone comes up is called an aliyah, which means an ascent. We ascend from the floor to the amud, to the lectern, to the amud, and it can be one person, it can be more than one person. Every family has a different set of constellations. If we have the reading of the Torah during a non-Benay mitzvah service, which we have many, obviously, sometimes we offer the opportunity to someone celebrating a simcha. Someone is naming a baby. Maybe someone is there observing a yard site and happens to be there, and we know that they feel comfortable being in public and offering something, because sometimes people are very bashful and they don't want to display their talents, and so they're a little reticent, and they don't. But other people feel very comfortable coming up and offering the aliyah, which is a fairly well-known bracha, fairly well-known set of blessings that are a part of the ritual.
And historically, way back when, it would be the case that the person who was chanting Torah would say the blessings for themselves, and it would be always one and the same person. However, as Rabbi mentioned, the aliyah to the Torah is an opportunity to honor somebody in the community for a variety of reasons, and it was just a reality that not everybody who the community might want to honor was proficient in chanting Torah. And so there was allowance that was made for somebody to come up just to recite the blessings, even if somebody else was chanting Torah. And that is now widespread across movements, just the norm. And then the only other thing I would say is that in our worship, it is customary anytime that we have Torah text in worship to bind it in blessings. So whether it's Haftarah from the book of prophets, whether it's the Torah reading, even Shema, the Shema and Ve'ahavta that we read earlier in the service is surrounded by blessings. So that is just a very common way to incorporate Torah into worship.
Any other questions? We'll save some general questions for the end that I have here.
Great.
Okay, good. We now continue our worship service. We ask you to turn to page 374, and we ask you to rise as we now return the Sefer Torah to the Ark. Page 370.
Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki nitzkav shemo levado, odo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren le'amo, tehila lechol Asidav Livnei Israel Am Kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
Please turn to page 375 and read with me. When Torah entered the world, freedom entered it. The whole Torah exists only to establish peace. Its highest teaching is love and kindness. What is hateful to you, do not do to any person. That is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Those who study Torah are the true guardians of civilization, honoring one another, doing acts of kindness, and making peace. These are our highest duties. But the study of Torah is equal to them all because it leads to them all. Let us learn in order to teach. Let us learn in order to do.
Haim ki lama chazikim ba v'tocheha me'ushar yiracheha darchei noah v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu
Now continue on page 586. Page 586 is Aleinu at the top of the page.
Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon ha'kol Ha'tet gdula le'yotzer bereshit Shehu noteh shamayim ve'yosed aretz U'moshav yikaro ha'shamayim mim'al U'shechinatu zo b'govhei meromim Hu Eloheinu ein od V'anachnu koreim u'mishkachavim u'modim Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
You may be seated.
Turn to page 591. May we gain wisdom in our lives, overflowing like a river of understanding, loved each of us for the peace we bring to others. May our deeds exceed our speech, and may we never lift up our hand, but to conquer fear and doubt and despair. Rise up like the sun, O God, over all humanity. Cause light to go forth over all the lands between the seas, and light up the universe with the joy of wholeness, of freedom, and of peace.
V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz hayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo
On page 592. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die. People do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. At this moment in our worship, we pause to remember those who have gone from our world, those people who have died in recent days, those who died at this season in years past, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. If today you are present and you are remembering someone, we invite you to rise as the name of their loved one is recited. And in the end, we'll all rise and recite the words of the Kaddish together. But these are the people whom we are remembering at this time. Sacred memories we carry of these loved ones. We remember those who died in the last 30 days. Paula Sarnoff Orrick, mother-in-law of Karen Orrick. Colton Hunt, nephew of Bill and Linda White. Ron Walker, husband of Janice Wexler, stepfather of Ari Davidson and Josh Davidson. And David Goldenberg, husband of Estelle Goldenberg of blessed memory, and mother of Judith Peterson and Zena Goldenberg. And these are the Yartzeiten that we observe at this time, those who died at this season in years past. In continuing devotion, we recall with love Patricia Barth, Ruth Berman, Igor Bleicher, Theodore Borsky, Eleanor Friedman, Fanny Friend, Monroe Glazer, Lawrence Harris, Alan Hubbard, Alfred Kadushin, Frank Kaplowitz, Anna Krasno, Louis Crystal, Dolores Leak, Eleanor Levin, Max Levin, Henry Libber, Edward Libber, Linda Preisler, Lillian R. Roth, Jerome M. Roth, Jeff Sauer, Sandy Schwartz, Morris Siegel, Sue Sweet, James Vandenberg, Saul Weinswig, Irving Yaffe, and Amy Zolot. And of course, there may be members of this worship community who may be remembering others whose names did not appear on the Kaddish list this week, but nonetheless, we know that they are in your hearts, and so you are in our hearts as well. And if you would like to add a name to our list of memory, we now invite you to do that as well. Daniel Pearl. Zichronam livracha, may all their memories be blessings in our hearts and the hearts and minds of all those who knew and loved them. Testifying to the faith that binds the generations of our people, we now invite you to turn to page 598 in the prayer book, and as a community now we rise to recite the words of the mourner's Kaddish, thanking God for the lives that were ours to share with our loved ones, and thanking God for the memories that we also carry forward with us. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach hirutei ve'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uvyomechon, uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, v'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam ulalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal, shemei dekudsha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru amen. May God send peace to all who mourn and comfort to those who are bereaved, and we say amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. We have a few announcements to make because goodness knows we have a congregation and we want to make sure that everyone is updated as much as possible on the goings-on of our synagogue. So first of all, thank you all for coming out today. Many thanks to our tech guru, Melissa Osborne, who is with us today. Thank you very much, Melissa. I would like to also make sure that the proper amount of gratitude goes to Nicole Jar, our Director of Lifelong Learning, our cantor, Jacob Namey, for being wonderful Bima partners during this service and all that we do here really at Temple of Beth El. And thank you all again for being with us today, whether you are online with us today or whether you are here in the sanctuary. And Nicole also greeted you outside, and she greeted you with one question to make sure that you were vaccinated. As people know who are members of Temple Beth El, we do require vaccination and booster and proof of vaccination and booster in order to come into our building at this time. Whoever is eligible needs to be masked as well. So thank you for, first of all, wearing your masks all appropriately. We wanted to talk about contact tracing as well. If you test positive for the COVID vaccine, for the COVID virus between now and 5 days from now, after having been present here at Temple Bethel, and there may not have been a connection, but still it's important for us to know, please contact Stephanie Kushner in the office so that we can then inform anyone else who was here that day that there was someone who was here that day who had tested positive. Again, this is our responsibility in contact tracing during these somewhat uncertain times about the course of the coronavirus. So please help one another by continuing to wear masks and to help us do contact tracing if we have to do that. A couple of other brief announcements. First of all, next Friday evening, February 11th, is Sisterhood Shabbat. At 7:30 p.m., the Sisterhood will help lead services with us, for us, and they will have a speaker who is Becca Schwartz. She is the Resettlement Director at Jewish Social Services, and the title of her presentation is Refugee Resettlement, Afghan Evacuation, and Beyond. Next Saturday, there'll be Torah study at 9 o'clock with Steve Olson on Zoom. A week from tomorrow on Sunday will be our Blockstein lecture. And this year we have the extreme privilege, I think, of having the director of Dane County Madison Public Health, who is Janelle Heinrich. She's going to be our speaker. She'll be here at Temple Bethel, and we will hopefully learn a lot about her very busy couple of years dealing with the pandemic and the kinds of things that brought her to these moments of her being able and willing to undertake all of those responsibilities. Any information about registering, what platform we're using for any of those presentations, it's all available online at tbemadison.org. That's the end of the formal announcements. Now we have time for questions. Your final opportunity. Only today is your final opportunity. You can ask questions anytime, but this gives us the chance to also involve both our congregations, our online congregation and our in-present congregation, with learning more about today's service or anything else that you'd like to know about.
My question is, there are a number of places where the Reform movement has made changes to the text of the prayers to kind of fit modern day life better. And I was just wondering if you foresee any others coming, or if there are any that have been talked about behind the scenes by rabbis and cantors and educators, or ones that you would like to see in the future.
So throughout the iterations of the various Reform prayer books in America that really began to be printed in the mid-1860s, 1870s, there have been changes throughout every generation. In recent days, for example, we have had Mishkan Tefillah come out, and Mishkan Tefillah, one of the important features of Mishkan Tefillah, and this came out in 2005, 2006, somewhere in there, is they created, I think, what they call a gender-neutral text, meaning that they removed from as much as possible, and you'll find actually vestiges of poems that are here that they had to print verbatim that are not quite gender neutral, and the same, I think, with our other Mishkan HaNefesh texts for the High Holy Days. But the innovation here was that in the worship that they created, it was gender neutral, mostly in the Hebrew and mostly in the English.
And I would note that it certainly approaches that gender neutrality when talking about God in the most recent prayer book in Mishkan Tefillah, but not necessarily when talking about people. You still will see a number of references to sing the song of men and women, or talking about brothers and sisters in a kind of more gender binary normative way. And maybe that's because, again, they're trying to honor the integrity of the original poem, or for a variety of reasons. to answer your question about whether we think that there might be some liturgical innovation happening within the movement soon, I haven't heard about anything specific other than to say that there is a lot of creativity happening within congregations across the country. The rabbi and I have
Yes.
some long-term plans to try to address those things within our community here. We recently began doing a workshop that we're offering once a month where people can kind of develop some more ritual and spiritual literacy so that we can really generate some robust conversation about how we approach ritual and prayer in our community here. We're calling that Niftach Libenu, let us open our hearts. But also, the rabbi and I very much want to try to explore some of those innovative and creative opportunities in our worship here in the long term.
One of the things that we are able to do in this era when publishing a thing with paper in it is likely not going to go away, but it may modify it, may morph into something different. It could suggest, as the cantor mentioned, that we as a congregation might create our next generation of Siddur in the future after we have worked with people in our workshop and after we really have the spirit of innovation here. We believe it's here. We believe it's necessary. And now we're going to be taking some concrete steps to move in that general direction. No particular horizon that we can see at this moment, but we know the horizon is there.
We also have a conversation going on about the gendered Hebrew language and how we can use non-gendered language as we are teaching.
Even in Hebrew, there are ways, and that is a wonderful conversation to have over Kiddush.
Right, but it is an innovation we are looking at.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Any other questions here? All right, I have some two very general questions. One is, why do holidays start in the evening? And the other is, why does Hebrew go from right to left?
All right, so as far as why holidays start in the evening, I think, and the rabbi might be able to help with some rabbinic citation, but the biblical kind of source of that is that there was evening before there was morning in the Torah. We talk about, that things began in darkness and then there was light. And all of the days of creation say, and there was evening and there was morning such and such day. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And there was evening and there was morning, on and on. So there seems to be at least this idea in the early part of the Torah that the day actually began with the evening and went evening to evening, sundown to sundown. And then that eventually would translate to all of the various ritual processes that were developed in early Israelite religion, and then on into our more modern kind of ritual.
Yeah, and there's no other rabbinic citation. That's the main reason why, because the book of Genesis sets out for us the order of day like that.
And then the other question was why Hebrew is written from right to left.
So this is not a difficult question, but it's a historical question. Hebrew is descended from a number of ancient Near Eastern languages, all of which seem to take that general direction from right to left. The alphabets, too, changed. The Hebrew that we see on the printed page or that we find in our word processors today, those who use Hebrew in their word processors, and it is available in Word, so if you have Word, you have Hebrew, though you don't know it. You may not know it. All of that, helps us go from right to left to sort of keep us straight. That's just the way that the Hebrew language developed, and other Semitic languages continue that practice. Arabic, Farsi, other languages too are written.
Or do all of the various Semitic languages, or even, Farsi is not technically Semitic, but the majority of the languages in that region are read from right to left, including the ones that we no longer use, like Aramaic and Akkadian, and but it's a norm in that region.
We are so pleased that you all came today. We have final closing music, and then actually we have outside, we'll be ceremonially saying Kiddush and Motzi here from the Amud, and outside we have rolls and we have juice for everybody, so we'll get there eventually. But again, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being with us today. We hope that we were able to demonstrate to our 6th grade parents and class and others perhaps, some of the worship that we offer here, some of the concerns through the questions that were raised, and we continue to learn, we continue to teach in this very important atmosphere we have of people who are thirsty for knowledge. So thank God for that. We continue with our closing song, really on page 643 of Yesher Tzar Me'od, page 643 at the bottom of the page.
Our tradition teaches us that the whole world might be a narrow bridge, but also that everyone in their own life has a narrow bridge that they have to cross. And that the most important, essential thing is not to make oneself afraid, not to give in to our fears. Kol ha'olam kulo, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Kol ha'olam kulo, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Ve'haikar lo lefachet, ve'haikar lo lefachet, yai lai 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 Yesher Tzar Me'od, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Kol ha'olam kulo, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Yesher Tzar Me'od, Ve'haikar lo lefachet kal, ve'haikar lo lefachet kal, yai lai 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 lai
Page 604, we have Vishamru, that's followed by Kiddush and Motzi. We invite the community to rise. Page 604.
Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. מששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו
אמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו ספרי לחיים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. לחיים.
We will, by the way, have some grape juice for everyone on the way out.
It's technically apple juice, but that's okay.
On page 606 is the text, if people who want it, for the motzi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz
B'tei avon.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Right.